When I run after what I think I want, my days are a furnace of stress and anxiety. If I sit in my own place of patience, what I need flows to me, and without pain. From this, I understand that what I want also wants me, is looking for me, and attracting me. There is a great secret here for anyone who can grasp it.
The program you are about to hear is fiction, science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction, fiction, fiction.
Intuitive salutations, cognonauts. You're listening to Exofathom, a podcast that explores the outer reaches of human understanding. Tonight, we're going to chat about fate and prophecies. And I'm Ayla, and I'm joined by my two lovely co-hosts, Nick and Mike. Nick, how are you?
I foresee that I am well. Thank you.
Oh, good. So you're well now and later.
Probably.
Cool. Mike, how are you doing tonight?
You know me, hanging in there. And It's probably the foreseeable future too.
I was going to say, with this pattern of you hanging in there, I would predict you'll be hanging in there next we talk too.
Hopefully.
Well, cool. Well, so yeah, I'm excited to talk about tonight's subject. It's not going to be really specific. It's just going to kind of be about fortune telling and prophecies and trying to glean into the future. And a lot of it came up because this weekend I was surfing the internet and I started to think about 2021, and I was on the Google and I got curious. Like, what's the astrological prediction for 2021? And it was really long, so I got bored. So I switched over to it's the year of the dragon. Wonder what that says. Then I was like, oh, what does Nostradamus say? I thought, well, was he right about what he said about 2020? What did he say about 2020? So there's my rabbit hole. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, with a little bit more of a modern twist at the end. So stay tuned. But yeah, so Mike and Nick, before we get into everything, what comes to mind when you guys think about prophecies and fortune telling?
Well, I mean, there's two things that come to my mind personally. I think of snake oil and then Instagram for some reason.
What?
Weird.
I don't know. And
Because astrology memes? Or?
Yeah, I'll justify that by clarifying a little bit. The snake oil, obviously, with the sort of the trope of the fortune teller, and Instagram, because there seems to be a lot of astrology memes and tarot and a lot of that woo-woo stuff that's on there a lot. So
we do like our moon memes, right? Like we're all wanting to know where the moon is.
There's always a super moon or some sort of, lion's mane blood moon, or who knows.
Whoa.
Yeah, you got to get on the gram, Mike. You're missing out.
Yeah.
Yeah, missing out on so much.
So much.
Give us your soul. Follow the gram.
I think I've already traded my soul for the gram in one way or another.
No.
I kind of dig the tarot and palm reading and things like that, and the fortune telling, at least just to add some color over the black and white of life. I do get into it. Palm reading, I did look a bit of it, and then tarot cards, of course. And then, you have your, I guess, sort of deja vu moments. I don't know if that's like a personal fortune telling, when like something you saw far in the future end up coming true, and for a split second you remembered it or something like that.
That is weird. No, it's true. It's like a broken prophet, right? Because it's like you had the information. It's just you remembered it too late.
Yeah, it just hits you in a strange way. And you have that moment of like, I've been here before. What is this?
Yeah, no, I can definitely identify with that. And it's interesting that you mentioned palm reading. I think that was probably one of my first introductions too. There was this used bookstore in Long Beach, and I don't know if it was called Acres of Books, but it was massive warehouse, and they even had like an outdoor side with this like crappy roof and then just like crates of books, and they had an entire room on like spiritual stuff. And I found a palm reading book and I got it for like $1. um, and I remember trying to read everybody's palms, and I thought that was pretty empowering as a child, like I can tell an adult's future.
Yeah, it
Mm.
feels really cool.
Definitely.
I'm not really a fan of the fatalistic sort of aspect of clairvoyance and fortune telling, if I'm being honest.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
glad you're not. I have some notes about fate and fatalism later on, but do
mhm.
share. That's
No, I think that there's a possibility that people's opinions, and sometimes when we look at authority figures, we have the ability to manifest the things that they say.
mm,
And so I am very apprehensive about any sort of assumed authority figure telling me what my future is going to be, because I think that part of it is like this sort of feedback loop that, it's almost like they plant the seed and then you create the future,
mhm.
and so I tend to be a little bit superstitious about that stuff.
Which is kind of cool though. Like if they can sense there's something you want that you haven't named, maybe it can be used for good.
Yeah, but I've always thought, that type of energy manipulation works in a vacuum best. And so, especially when it comes to things like your future or your livelihood or your existence in general, I think that there should be as few cooks in the kitchen as possible.
I think it's good to just be on guard at all times. Like I've had palm readings uh, with people, and it's end up with things like just completely tragic fates. It's
Yeah,
like I keep
absolutely.
it in the back of my mind, in the very least,
No.
but there is always like a proper defense mechanism. So where hopefully I'm not becoming what they say, but becoming what I am mentally interpreting it as.
Don't put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby.
Touche.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope you do not succumb to that fate as well, Mike. I
Ah,
like
there's those things.
Yeah. Well, and talking about the Instagram, there are some tarot readers that they advertise their services, but they'll do these like general community polls, and they always add that disclaimer like this is just what the cards say now. If you change things tomorrow, it could be different. So that's kind of a nice little like release valve, I think. Take some of the pressure off.
That's a release of liability. That's
Yeah,
what that
it is.
is.
There was a time though where I ran into a probabilistic improbable situation where I had two of the same exact tarot readings months
Oh,
apart.
from different people or the same person?
That's a good question. But yeah, it was just bizarre to see those two different readings come up, and the two different ones end up being exactly the same, and it kind of fucked with my mind a bit. Still kind of does,
Mm.
and I may have like an apprehension to get those tarot readings again, but I do want to because it is statistically interesting if over a long enough time and enough events
Just keep
that
getting the
they
same
stay the same
cards.
cards. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a little freaky though. And I guess that kind of segues into my follow-up question, which I feel like I know Nick's answer, but it would be, do either of you partake of any divination activities? So
Don't
yeah,
put that
Mike.
evil on me, Ricky Bobby.
You don't even check your astrology? You don't use
No,
a pendulum?
no. Well, see,
No
I mean,
angel cards?
so
Runes?
this is my superstition about this whole thing. As I said before, I think that we are easily influenced by suggestion in our reality making process. And so when you allow a figure or somebody externally to interpret your reality for you, you end up absorbing that interpretation,
So
regardless of whether you want to or not.
So then if you take that third person out of it and it's like you doing your own tarot or your own pendulum, does that change things for you, or is it still
And not necessary. I mean, like, yeah, I guess it's a little bit different, but in that case, I just believe that it's more confirmation bias. So, you already know the answer. You're just looking for a justification for the answer. I mean, if that's the way you want to find your answer, then that's totally fine. But, at some point, like you could do your own tarot cards or swing a pendulum. And if you don't want if you don't get the answer you like, you can always just redo it.
That's like almost a thing with psychology personality tests, right? Like you can take them multiple times, and if you're not honest with yourself,
Yeah,
you can come up with wildly different answers,
totally. Yeah.
which then you reinforce through future behavior through some like confirmation bias. Like, oh no, I don't want to be this shitty personality. Let me be this personality, and then you start to like reverse engineer that human to try to become, which
Yeah.
almost feels like divination in a way too.
Oh yeah.
Well, and that
Well,
kind of touches on the astrology thing too, because I feel like some people use that as an excuse to just be awful people. So they're like,
or
oh, don't mind me. I'm just a whatever rising and the moon in the second house of Jupiter's anus. I don't know.
okay, just for those who don't know, Nick, he happens to have one of the shittier astrological presentations. And I remember this because on
Use
our
it.
first date, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. No, because like on our first date, I had asked him like the quintessential "What's your sign?" as a joke, but then he wouldn't answer it, and that kind of raised a red flag. So several years later, I get his birth time from his mom. I find out he's Scorpio rising and a Gemini. And he might even be a double Gemini. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
I'm a moody bitch. That's what that means.
But
spiteful.
Yeah.
there's something good about like the pragmatic use of it, like being able to bring it up on a date and having some at least some common
Chit
ground to
chat.
start talking.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
certainly has its utility in conversation and that type of stuff. I'm not knocking it for that. I just think that some people don't realize that it's really for entertainment. That's why horoscopes always have the disclaimer that this is for entertainment purposes.
As they should, because I've said it before and I'll say it again. The LA Times horoscope writer is extremely biased against Virgos. I don't know what a Virgo did to him, but there is never a good Virgo astrological something. And I'm looking
Virgos,
at you, Mathis, LA Times jerk.
all Virgos are awful people. Never hang out with Virgos.
That's
Yeah.
where I'm always like repping my moon and my like rising sign. Like, oh gosh. Well, okay. So we're getting a little in the weeds here, but I do think it's very interesting whether it's confirmation bias and entertainment, whether it's tapping into some ether and channeling it for our informational purposes or a con. I don't know. I was just rifling off a couple of things that came up when I thought about prophecy and fortune telling. So, you have your religious prophets. You've got the Ides of March and Caesar. You have the meaning of celestial events. There's tarot, pendulums, astrology, Chinese astrology, runes. In the Greek mythology, they have the characters of the fates. And a lot of different literature, you'll see, um, you know, prophets coming out of different places and dispelling information that gets the character from point A to point B. And then you have your psychics like Nostradamus, Sylvia Brown, John Edward, Carlos Castaneda. And then you've got people like Joan of Arc. You has all there's the I Ching, which is something I only heard about a year ago. And it's a book where you can kind of like divine more information and ask questions. Um, and then, like Mike said, there's psychological personality tests and things like that. So, just thinking on those, and I know there's probably a ton more. Why do you think we do it? Why do
Well,
we do this?
well, you forgot one of the most crucial for fortune
That's right.
telling mechanism. That would be the octopus that foretells the winner of the World Cup.
Oh, yes, you are correct, sir.
He's the only one I listen to.
That's the coolest octopus.
Yeah.
Seriously. But isn't it like it's died a bunch of times, so they
Oh
keep
yeah,
replacing it?
yeah. Octopi only last like 3 years, so yeah. Every World Cup, it's a different octopus.
Far too prophetic for its own good.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, man. But yeah,
But anyways, what was your question? I'm sorry.
it was asking why. Why throughout time are humans trying to pull out the truth of what may come?
Well, I mean, there's multiple layers to that. Obviously, I think there's an element of the archetype of occultism and just the occult, which literally translate to the hidden. So
I
there's
didn't know that. That's very interesting. The
yeah.
occult means the hidden.
Yeah, occult means hidden. So it's just we have a fascination with a hidden knowledge. We sometimes we create hidden knowledge just for the mystery of it all.
The
Um,
lulz.
yeah, well, just to be a part of the club, right? I mean, we all want to feel special as humans, and I think there's a need for us to distinguish ourselves from the masses. And I think that a lot of people back in the day and still going on today created these sort of mechanisms of information in which you can only really spread to the initiated. And I think that that's something that's just innate in human nature, that we look at information as a value, as some sort of not necessarily monetarily value, but something parallel to a monetary value. And so we want to safeguard it, and we want to kind of keep it to ourselves and hoard it. So I think that there's always been characters throughout human history that have claimed to have hoarded all of the secret knowledge. And if you go back to the idea of the Bible and the Garden of the Eden, Adam and Eve were only tempted by one thing, and that was knowledge. So I think that there's
That's some.
Hmm?
I just like that association.
Oh
Good
yeah, well,
point.
yeah, I think that there's just something primal about our desire for knowledge. So I think that that's why these sort of archetypes keep popping up in history.
Yeah, we're always out there seeking knowledge. I mean, like even look at like more societally accepted forms of knowledge and knowledge gathering, like college and masters and doctorates and things like that. You become initiated through that underclass process, through those 4 years. And then once you get to your specialization, even like a med school, right? You go to med school and you become a doctor, but when you get there, it's like the competition is over. Everybody here is just to become doctors. So we're going to now give you this secret knowledge that you did not have before.
Right.
And we always, like you said, like humans are hungry for secret knowledge that makes them feel some sense of value. I will argue against the monetary notion of value, but I'm still early in that thought process. But there is some deep inherent value that you find in yourself once you find this knowledge, or just any knowledge in general. So like that's regardless of its validity or if it's truth value or anything like that. And no, I'm just rambling. Ayla, why do you think we do these things?
I think it's definitely along the lines of just that knowledge hoarding. And I think like anything of staying power, a lot of the reason it stays around is there's no answer, or there's a duality that's ever present. So, we either live in a magical world or we don't. And do we define the soul as magical, or is science magic? Like, let's say you put phosphorus on a pine cone and chuck it in a fire. I think that's the chemical. It changes color. It could be like, look at me, I'm changing the fire color. Like, so I think that, there are humans that can manipulate science early on before everybody catches on, and they can make it appear like they have divining powers. So there's that ego side. But I think, a lot of the why consumers and people who are absorbing this information, I think a lot of it has to do also with a need for control and predictability. And I think it's interesting because I've observed that when I'm looking more at astrology, it's usually in periods of like uncertainty. So like if I'm having a great week, I'm probably not going on my astrology app or something like that. But if it's a shit day, I'm like, oh, what the hell's going on today? I think it's because it's like a little soothing, like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde. That's it. I'm not incompetent at my job or whatever. Like it's the planets.
It's religion.
Coping mechanisms. Like they're good
Coping,
to
yeah.
have. And I got distracted. Yeah, no, they are important. It's like elements of faith thrown in there, which makes me think it's just like a stumbling after the death of God, Nietzsche's death of God sort of thing. And it's just that nice comfort, it's like, oh yeah, I don't have to blame myself because, I'm overly critical. It's this fucking thing.
Oh yeah. Or even the comfort of like science, where it's like there might not be a God. I might die forever when I die and disappear into the bleak darkness forever, and I won't even care because I will cease to exist. I don't know how atheists go through the day, but if that's your jam, I get you. I respect that. But at the same time, it's like probably what makes them tick is like, yeah, like they can contribute to the body of knowledge, knowing that humanity will continue or their book will continue or something.
It's soothing to have the answer. That's the atheist's, justification. They have the answer. Nothing. They're just comfortable with that. That's the thing.
And they are unaware of how much faith it takes to have that idea.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just as crazy to be like, oh, we have consciousness that just disappears one day. Okay. I don't know. I just think it's so, I don't know. It's just, there's no way that we go. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. There's actually a really cool neuroscientist that had like a partial brain death in the parts of the brain that give rise to memory and consciousness. And he still had like an outer body experience. He's like a Harvard professor. So it's kind of an interesting read I'm diving into. But moving along, because we're talking about prophecies today. I think I asked you both, you have not watched The Prophecy with Christopher Walken?
No.
Okay. So I only bring it up, one, because Christopher Walken's pretty cool, and I should probably see those movies at some point because I do like horror. But I thought it was interesting in reading the plot for that movie. They talk about two angels falling to earth, and one of them enters the main character's home, and he warns him of coming events. And I just wanted to bring that up because it's also like, when I think about fortune telling, and it gets into what Nick brought up about fate, the question is, what do you do with that information? Is it something that's going to happen and is unchangeable? Or is it something that you can use to change things?
Yeah. I mean, that's just, we get into the concept of fatalism and free will. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I know that it's innate in humans to want to believe that we have free will, and I tend to believe that we do to an extent. I don't know if there's something exactly, if there's something exact about the concept of free will, but I think that there is some distinction. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's a balancing act for sure, and I don't know necessarily if I like a fatalist or a deterministic universe. I think that kind of is strange, and then it's weird because it would be a paradox, right? So if you knew the future of something and you had the ability to change it, well, which universe do we live in? Like, is it deterministic or is there free will? And I'm not really sure. I think maybe there is just a mixture of both, and that's why you can have the concept of like being able to alter a timeline with prior knowledge.
I would like to think there's free will, just from a divination point of view. That's what separates us from the angels, right? The angels are servants of God. They don't have free will. We do. It was a gift from God, blah blah blah.
Yada yada yada.
Yeah, but whenever you make a decision, I'd like to snakes and stuff, and then a bunch of people got kicked out of a club called Eden, and then things got weird for a couple of thousand years, and then everything.
Leafs turned into like these whole industries of fashion,
and I think free will not being determined. Oh, I think there's from a multiverse point of view, every decision that you make um, will split the universe. So there's two universes: one where you made decision A and one where you made decision B. If you're provided some sort of knowledge from somewhere of the future, you still have the free will to either follow that road that you're given or break it in some way. But I still think
Mm.
that both universes exist, which starts to get around the idea: if you think of something, then does it exist? And that's
Well, then,
another rabbit hole.
well, and then you think about, okay, well, if you do have prior knowledge of a future event and you're able to change it and change the course of the timeline, well, then was that just a deterministic sort of chain of events that happened as well? You finding out about something and then being able to change it, was that just also
Then
fate?
you start to fall
Mhm.
into infinite loops. You start to fall into
Yes,
that recursion.
Mhm.
turtles all
The
the way down.
But the thing is, though, is that in the moment when you're making those decisions, that kind of scope doesn't matter. You have to be able to have the right scope for that timeline in that decision making, and then you can, go philosophize yourself to death if you want about whether or not it was deterministic that you made this free will choice, or yeah, you can drive yourself insane. But I think the most important thing is the decision in the timeline that you exist in.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because
Mhm.
you touched on as an idea that determinism is something that can only really be looked at in retrospect, and I think that that's really true. I think that in some cases we can just say like, okay, well, maybe that was just destined to be that way, and I think that that's also some sort of coping mechanism for us to maybe grab a hold of the chaos that might actually be, existing and make it seem a little bit more orderly. But yeah, I definitely like that idea that determinism really can only be inspected after the fact.
Mhm. Oh, I like that too. And I like that, Mike, you brought up religion as well, because so the prophecy, they have angels in the movie, but even just like thinking of Joan of Arc, for example, were we to put her in the folder of prophets and stuff, like she had someone saying, I have to go here and fight this battle. Like God is telling me to do this. So that rests on a tremendous faith where there's no doubt in your mind that this information is true. And then you believe so hard and you make it true. Or it was true and it comes to pass. Um,
Isn't it
but
interesting that whenever we have like hallucinations, it's always God talking to us?
That
Like,
like as
that
humans, like
great
God or
unknown.
aliens.
well, I just think it's really like, it's kind of like an interesting mechanism in which we and in which our psychology is embedded. Like most people who have sort of like auditory hallucinations, either they gather that it's either God or the devil or some sort of deity,
Mm,
which is interesting.
deity.
Yeah.
You sounded so formal when you said
Oh
that. Sort
yeah.
of deity.
Deity.
Well, okay, so I was going down this like hall of mirrors, so to speak, because what we're talking about is one angel or God talking to one person. So that's one thing. And then I feel like large scale prophecies, so like Nostradamus or people who portend to divine, like Joan of Arc, if I'm in this place, I'm going to alter the course of this war or something like that. It started me thinking about like mass scale knowing. So I did a little diagram. I think my two co-hosts can see it here. So I was just thinking like, okay, so you have the birth of a prophecy and then it's shared on a mass level. And so after that, the mass knowing is like this crucial part because from there, you can have a couple of consequences. That thing can become reality. So reality equals the prophecy, or mass knowing alters reality. So with that information, they course correct. And in that case, in a lot of ways, too, reality equals prophecy because you prove that by not doing the thing you were going to do, you changed things. Um, And then there's a case where mass knowing equals a reality, but the reality doesn't equal prophecy. So you prove the prophet false. Anyway, I was going down a couple different routes, and I think what I kind of came down to in each of these little pathways was about the importance of knowing, the importance of that information. I guess it goes back to what you were talking about, Nick, in terms of knowledge, but just how in a lot of these cases we focus on the reality of the outcome, but then we don't think about like the soul, right? Because I read this article and it was talking about how things may or may not come true externally or internally. And I thought that was kind of a groovy distinction. Like, well, if you think of it that way, you could probably do that confirmation bias thing and make everything true, right? Like just by splitting hairs and reworking words and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where you
make
get
everything false.
Yeah. Okay. So, ready for some story time? Okay. So the next little bit, I just kind of stuck with Nostradamus for a little bit because one of the articles I read was talking about his observations from 2020. And I just thought this was kind of entertaining. So, full disclaimer, this is for entertainment value, but my source is KQED, which is a radio station in San Francisco. You can look it up. And so a couple weeks ago, I guess a meme had started doing the rounds claiming that Nostradamus predicted coronavirus. It was flagged by Snopes and PolitiFact for false information.
heroes.
They're
heroes.
Oh,
I was being quippy about them having to flag it for false information. A quatrain from 1200.
Yeah. I laughed. My mic was on mute. So.
Oh, I see. Because duh. Yeah. Sorry, I know. I that went right over my head. Sorry. Yeah, no. Silly. Sometimes you just have to point it out. You got to just say because you have to say it. So okay, so one thing I didn't know was Michel de Nostradamus was a French philosopher, and he lived in the 1500s. And so when I was reading this article, they were just talking about some of the things that he foretold. So, for example, there's the 9/11 attacks. He called it the sky will burn at 45 degrees. Fire approaches the great new city. Immediately, a huge scattered flame leaps up.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, that can apply to anything.
True. So
Yeah.
so this is a list of the things he quote got right. But the other thing they talk about is that he was notoriously vague. So he has one thing here where he talks about people will travel safely through the sky. That's air travel. He mentions the blood of the just will be demanded of London, burnt by fire in 3 times 20 plus 6, which was the year of the Great Fire in London. And then he predicts something about an asteroid hitting the Earth. I don't know, but they're coinciding it with NASA's development of the DART program, which is the Double Asteroid Redirection Test Program, which is interesting because they are April of 2021 going to do their first asteroid redirect. So I don't know. I mean, maybe NASA's reading Nostradamus and planning accordingly, or they got there themselves. But yeah, any thoughts about some of his? Do you know of any of his other prophecies that came true, or?
Not off the top of my head. I think he prophesied Hitler.
He did,
and a couple other things.
I think he called him Eitler.
Yeah,
just a little off.
There are some that are kind of eerily close to what actually happened, but I don't know. I think he was. I mean, he was pumping out a whole bunch of quatrains, and if you have 6,300 quatrains that are supposed to foretell some future event, I mean, you're going to get some of them somewhat correct. And I think that
absolutely.
I think it's also harkens back to what Mike said about like determinism being in retrospect. Like people can go to his quatrains now and then, like apply the meaning after the fact. Nobody was at, on September 10th, holding a Nostradamus book saying, 9/11 was going to happen. It's when something terrible happens, then people go back and they're like, oh, I wonder if Nostradamus said anything about this.
Just like I did this weekend. Where I was like,
Yeah.
I wonder what he said about 2020.
Right.
I've read a bit of Nostradamus as a kid because it was just laying around the house, and now I wonder. Part of me wonders if he was like an early remote viewer,
Maybe.
and these things just started to come to him, and so like he just started to write it out. And yeah, you're right. Like if you throw 6,000 darts, one of them is going to hit the bullseye, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
or hopefully. So I can see either way, where like it is the looking back on it through through this deterministic lens. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense now. That makes sense now. That makes sense now. But yeah, no, I'm kind of stuck in the middle of it. I always liked the mystery of it, so I always just kind of kept it a mystery box.
Yeah, I'm willing to
Mhm.
suspend my disbelief for entertainment for sure. But I know that there are a lot of people who kind of take it a little bit farther than just entertainment purposes, and I think
Yes.
like we can't necessarily, you can't really, like, unless somebody comes to me and says, look, this is what's going to happen on this day and this is going to, like, and it actually does happen, then I might look at it and be like, oh, okay, maybe there is something there. But ascribing it after the fact is just really kind of like what we do to human. We're sense making animals. We need to make sense of things. So when crazy things happen, we want to know why.
Mhm.
But it's always nice to like I kind of with any ideas, whether they're meant for entertainment or more seriously, it's good to have like a guard, like that middle ground between taking into belief and
Mm.
just entertaining the idea, right? Because if you have an open mind, you can entertain
Mhm.
any idea, but not
Mhm.
follow through on it. That
Oh
like
yes.
different set of skills, I suppose. But it's always good, in my opinion, just at least to entertain it. So there's something fun with that mystery of Nostradamus.
Mhm.
Certainly. You're a romantic too, so obviously having a little bit of romance in the world isn't a bad thing.
Oh,
And
dude,
I
I need
definitely don't think.
all the romance in the
Yeah.
world.
Well, and I think it's kind of fun too that you lay that gauntlet down, Nick, that says, "Tell me before it happens."
Mhm.
And then if it happens, I will be impressed. So
Yeah.
I'm going to recant just a few 2020 prophecies from Mr. Nostradamus. And then I have a couple typed up for 2021. But do you guys have anything else to add before I go into those two?
No.
No, you're all good.
All right, sweet. And I had a cough there, so that was why I asked a weird question. Okay, so back to him being aggravatingly non-specific about his claims. He talks about one reference that says, "The great plague of the maritime city and diverse plagues will be upon mankind." So that's like super vague, right? And I don't know how they time these things. Like, are his quatrains just like a jumble, or does he date them?
No, he doesn't date them. They're just in iambic pentameter structure, and as I said, they don't. He never really talks about the exact dates of things.
Weird. So I
Yeah.
guess he might have like a chronology, and that's how they're basing what he said for 2020 and what he said for 2021. But um,
Mm.
so he talks about sorry. There's a book by Erica Cheetham, and it's a complete translation of his original text, first published in 1973. And there's a reference to plague, lightning, and hail at the end of March, and a couple other things. So it writes, "In the feeble lists, great calamity through America and Lombardy. The fire in the ship, plague and captivity. Mercury in Sagittarius, Saturn warning." So, and she writes here, we can all understand the references to plague and captivity, so quarantine and virus, but everything else in this passage lines up too. Assuming the feeble lists refer to the sick and the dead, America and Italy, Lombardy is a region in the north of the country, are in the top 3 most infected countries at the time that was published, along with Spain. Mercury did enter Sagittarius in December 19, which is when the first cases occurred. And Saturn moved into Aquarius on March 21, right as New York was going into lockdown. As for the fire in the ship, multiple cruise liners have become stranded at sea during the virus with emergencies on board, etc., etc. So, interesting.
Yeah,
No?
yes, it's
Yeah.
interesting, but were all of those together in one thing, or are they just cherry picking different aspects to create the narrative that he foretold the coronavirus? I mean, if these quatrains are right next to each other or within the same quatrain, then I can see that. But if you're taking all of these from different quatrains, then you're just cherry picking.
Yeah, well, and Wood I had ordered the book in time for this prophecy, this discussion, because I don't actually own any books or Erica Cheatham's, but this is from a article at a radio station, and the writer owns the book, so I don't know exactly
Mhm.
their method, but there it is. So, Mike, any thoughts or points or anything?
It is vague enough to just kind of fit anything.
Mm,
And I mean, given a long enough time span, you're going to have a plague or something like that, right?
Mhm.
true. I mean, we've
Um,
been saying there's going to be a plague for like years, so.
and then the fire in the ship, we don't know which ship. There's a lot of ships with a lot of fires, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
it could some specificity would kind of be nice, but like I said, like kind of getting back to like I guess some remote viewing things. These things are kind of vague, right?
Mhm.
There's you usually start off with just very simple, like one word answers. So it makes me wonder. Yeah, it makes me wonder towards the remote viewing thing, but it makes sense that it's vague, but it is frustrating. I
Mhm.
Yeah.
guess that's the roundabout thing to it.
I mean, I guess a great way to steel man Nostradamus is through that sort of concept that he was getting abstract divine images, like a lot of his quatrains are very strangely illustrative, but in a way that kind of feels almost like a hodgepodge of ideas.
Mm.
In so much that it reflects sort of like tapping into that stream of unconsciousness that kind of like you can click into to gather information. So it is
Yeah.
possible, like he was just like opening the receiver and he was seeing, like, oh, the lion will slay the bat, and like,
Yeah,
and the
there's also
city of Ivory will topple. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
there's also an intuitive thing too, right? Because the
Mhm.
writings seem intuitive more than, like you said, like yeah, they're more abstract, and from an AI point of view, from a knowledge base point of view, you can abstract up and then make one sentence mean multiple things. You can describe
Mhm.
anything as a thing. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just rambling.
Yeah,
No.
no, it's totally
Good.
fine. Well, and I ask those questions because we're going to get to the Whopper predictions of 2021. And I had to laugh because I was like, there's no way. But then I read what happened about 2020 and I was like, is there a way? And I was like, no. And then like I just went back and forth. So this is kind of, I don't know. We'll see. It says in this article, if you choose to believe in Nostradamus, you better start saying your goodbyes for 2021.
Mm.
The 2021 Nostradamus predictions are morbid, terrifying, and exhausting, especially after such an unpredictable year. And it seems the predictions end with uncertain death, another prediction that the world will end as we know it. Quote, after great trouble for humanity, a greater one is prepared. The great mover renews the ages, rain, blood, milk, famine, steel, and plague. Is the heavens fire seen, a long spark running? So naturally, the great trouble for humanity appears it could be the coronavirus. So like something more crazier happens after that. So some think famine and other horrors may be coming soon. And apparently, Nostradamus predicts, with no specific mention of the year, but after the occurrences of what we've seen, that zombies. There will be a battle between half dead and living will end the world. That's it.
That
That's
seems like a pretty cool way to go out, though.
with zombies.
Yeah. Well, they're not zombies. They're half dead. They're not the full dead, right? They're kind of zombies.
Like a quarter zombie, maybe.
And there's I mean, I don't want to get too much into concrete things because it gets scary, but I can see the point that he's trying to illustrate.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, also too, though, you can take umbrage with like, yeah. Usually, when something bad happens, some more bad things can happen, like cause and effect. So yeah, I don't know. Also, too, he was writing around the 1500s. So I think it's interesting because, like, the origin of the tarot, they were finding cards in Egypt around the 1500 that bared some of the first images that we have on tarot now. So I wonder too, like, if he was sitting there remote viewing, like, what was going on in the 1500s? Because I think there were a couple other weird, like, witchy poo things that were coming up around that time.
We were about to be out of the Dark Ages and into the Renaissance.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there was some sort of mass event within the human psychology that propelled us out of over religious, tyranny to sort of like this art focused society.
I do find the renew the ages interesting because it implies
The
that
Great
they
Reset.
died. I'm just thinking of more of like, gold, silver, bronze age of myths and of civilizations. The idea that it's renewed means that we've lost it, and I've been of the opinion that we're kind of in a informational dark age just due to the flood of information that we have, and lost our sort of this notion of ages. So I do find that kind of intriguing.
I think, I would probably be more interested if Nostradamus hadn't already made me worry about 2012. Because that's when I had his quatrains. I had his quatrains in 2011, 2010. No, yeah, probably. No, like 2006. That's when I bought that book. And I was thinking to myself, like, he was talking about 2012 and it's the end of the world. And I'm like, well, I got 6 years. That's plenty of time. Me being like a 21-year-old, like, 6 years is forever.
So long.
Yeah, it's such a long time.
So you wake up 6 years later, like, oh, shit.
Yeah. But, like, there was a whole contingency of people that were convinced that 2012 was the end. And, there are certain people that still believe that that's the case and that we're just experiencing the life flashing before our eyes of the universe, so to speak, and that everything was extinguished on 2012 and we're just living some sort of like some sort of energetic ripple.
I hate that theory. It's so freaky.
Yeah.
Or there was one guy who changed the prophecy.
Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
He knew and was like, nope.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I just wondered too, like, because if you talk about coming out of like the dark ages and things like that, it does kind of come back to that idea that in times of uncertainty, we might look to prophets and fortune tellers, or they might have opportunity to publish and make money and be more well known during those times. And let's see. So, which is why it's interesting. There's a CNN article that I found that was talking about a plague of prophets, all warning that the coronavirus is a sign we're at the end of days. And there was a cool quote that said, "But some who study religion and prophecies for a living say it's time for these social media psychics to take a self-enforced quarantine. Doomsayers are harming people's spiritual and psychological health."
I agree, and I think that's I honestly that's one of my biggest issues with people who exercise these sort of clairvoyant activities broadly in society. As I said, the vacuum of your own reality needs to stay pristine. And when you have people saying that the world is going to end and everything is going to be terrible and you might as well give up, like psychologically, that affects people in ways that we don't really understand yet. And
Well,
this whole
panic. We
well,
know about panic.
it's not even.
That'll cause.
That's just an immediate reaction. But we
Yeah.
talk about the overall like longevity of a sustained stress idea of what is going on in your reality, and this narrative that everything is doom and we're all gonna die is just, it's not helpful to society, because we find out that humans just stop caring. And you never want humans to stop caring about society and humanity.
I mean, I think everyone deserves a voice. I also think that doomsayers are completely fine, again, if you can entertain an idea but not take it into belief. So
Well,
if you
there's a subconscious absorption of other people's ideas that you just automatically have, and
Sure, but
most people don't have that mechanism to filter them.
Sure, but through people can develop those things through shadow work, through understanding their own psychology. So, like, I do agree with you that it is harmful, but it's something that people put on themselves by believing the doomsayer's words. And then a secondary effect of it is that it may get certain people off their ass to do things to avoid this cataclysmic future that these soothsayers, these sophists, these doomsayers are preaching, because that's what they're
You
doing.
mean
They're
like
preaching,
Greta?
right?
Just
Like
kidding.
Greta.
I was pretty pleased with that.
Mhm.
No, no.
That's what I'm.
Yeah,
Uh,
Earth needs help, but that was a joke. But no, like I think about like Y2K and like Mayan apocalypse and things like that. And it's an interesting question because they're talking about these con people who, for whatever reason, perpetuate doomsaying ideas to like get famous or get likes or whatever. And it's like, yeah, we should be able to trust people to discern and act the way they want to, but there's also that fear. Like I think in Y2K, weren't a lot of people doing something that wasn't very good for them? Like I don't remember, there was like panic buying or like something was weird that was
You
happening
don't even
leading up
need to
to
do
like,
Y2K. Just do, what was that? The electric Kool-Aid. Who was that? The people that thought that the comet was
they were
hiding a
going hard.
oh
starship.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. You
I
become
mean,
vulnerable to a psychic that then becomes a cult leader.
yeah, and then I'm like, that's
Like a
kind of
good
my.
book novel or something.
I mean, that's kind of my point. Like, I understand that we can work towards integrating and understanding our psychology better personally, and steel yourself against sort of influence. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but I also think that there are a lot of people who don't have those mechanisms, and that's very apparent through cult behavior and blindly following any leader that gives you an idea that you like. And I think that there's just there's nothing that we can do about it. It's innate in human nature. There's always going to be those types of people for sure. But I think that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's. I still think that there's a kind of a dangerous value in that.
Would
Yeah.
Yeah, would you say that the Department of Consumer Affairs should have a wing for psychics? Do we need
No,
to go that far? And
no,
cult leaders?
I'm against bureaucracy in all respects. So I would never say that we need to have some sort of governmental council to restrict
Okay, Ron
people
Swanson.
from no, but I mean, I wouldn't want any sort of authoritarian council telling us what we can and can't postulate. Like that's not what I'm going for. I just think that
Mm.
there is a level of if you're going to be the type of person that tries to claim that you know the future, you should try to do it within some sort of lens of responsibility. Now, that's wishful thinking, but like if it's going to happen, at least try to be responsible about it.
Yeah, and then my view is I just don't think anyone should be silenced. I think every voice has a place and should speak, even if their ideas are ludicrous or insane or they, whatever
So, okay,
society presses on people.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate with you, Mike. Let's say
It's a
somebody
good movie.
decides, yeah, it is actually, especially the ending because it's just like what we talked about 30 minutes ago. But yeah, so let's say somebody decides that we're all going to wear a duck on our head. And you're like, haha, that's never going to catch on. Everyone has a right to say that. But then it catches on. And for some odd reason now you have to wear a duck on your head. Could you go back in time as a informed prophet? Should you be able to do that? Would you scream to
I
the mountain tops and warn people like don't put the duck on your head?
no, I would go back in time, be the first guy to wear the duck on my head.
Oh, damn.
Hmm.
Okay. Wasn't expecting that. Mic everybody. All right. Well, let's move on because I have a couple of really interesting other things to share. Let's see here. And I'll come back to these other random questions if we have time. But so one fun fact that I wanted to share was just about predictions, that like in recent years scientists have discovered that the human brain works on predictions, which is contrary to the previously accepted theory that it reacts to outside sensations. And so there's a really cool quote here that says the unique contribution of our paper is to show that limbic tissue, because of its structure and the way the neurons are organized, is predicting. It is directing the predictions to everywhere else in the cortex, and that makes it very powerful. So it just makes me think about, you can have prophets that are channeling information, and then you can also have like people who just observe patterns. The old adage like history repeats itself, and we come to find out that even our own brain is doing this all the time. Our brain catalogs how we feel in certain situations. If you burn yourself, it remembers, okay, don't touch that because, it'll
Mhm.
predict if you touch that, you'll catch on fire or burn or something like that. And I think it's interesting too that the limbic system, which is a set of structures in the brain that deal with emotions and memory, um, is in the same place that, if you remember the Egypt episode, um, it's that same little piece of the brain that looks like the eye of Horus. Um, so it's cool to see kind of like science catching up to that. But how do you guys think about the distinction between like fortune telling and like pattern observation and predictability?
I mean, that's probably as close to a science as you can get without actually being a science. I think pattern recognition is incredibly important. I don't think I think that there's more of that than there is like an intuitive understanding of things. I think that exists as well. I think that pattern recognition is probably more um, widespread among humans. But I think about it in regards of like driving. We
Mhm.
just like if you are driving and you're actually paying attention to things, when a car is about to cut you off. When a car is about to change into your lane. When a car is about to do something crazy. Like you can feel it and you can read the car's body language because the driver is making micro adjustments to their wheel, or slightly accelerating more than the flow of traffic, or like we're able to kind of pick up on things and then loop them back into our experiential memory and be like, oh, this is what's going to happen. So I think that's in itself is some sort, it's kind of a mechanism of fortune telling or future understanding.
Mm,
But yeah, I mean, I think that definitely exists. I think that there's an intuition level to it as well. I definitely understand like the concept of getting feelings and urges about things that
mm,
I think is a different thing. I think that's more of a neurons in your heart and your stomach sort of thing, instead of recognizing hard patterns.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because, like, the body, it's your brain does store information that your body sends it
Mm.
without it being conscious. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, if your shoulders hunch every time a certain person shows around, your brain is going to start telling, like, you're going to call it your gut being like, oh, I don't know, this guy's got a bad vibe or something like that. But really, it's like your body noticing, like, shrugging your shoulders for some reason. And it
Yeah.
could be because subconsciously he's wearing the same shoes that, like, I don't know, some kidnapper who kidnapped you wore when they did that. Or, like, because there's weird associations that we make.
Mm.
So yeah.
Visual stimulant.
Mm.
I think so. I think pattern recognition reinforces intuition. If you exist within a pattern long enough, the other people around, other humans will notice. Once they notice, they'll pick that up and they'll start to intuit a future pattern that you will behave in. And they can kind of that. This is also adding in the random variables, things like rumors of whatever social things are happening. That pattern is built on intuition from things that they've seen. So that's how I think the future gets projected. I also think too within driving, there's that unconscious human network happening where you get that feeling that someone's edging closer to your lane, or you get those sort of feels. So I can see that working as like those two things coming together to build this overall fortune teller type experience um, when you're basically using patterns to tell you about the future. So yeah, like if I wake up every day at 7 a.m. and I go somewhere or I go to a cafe and I read a book every day for a year, anyone that's in that cafe will know that I go there at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And if I disappear for a month and then I come back, someone's gonna be like, "Where the hell have you been?"
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And now you've kind of messed with their intuition, you've messed with their pattern recognition, you've kind of you can mess with those things, but I think that at its base, it's patterns feeding intuition that feeds back into patterns, and which is why people like predictability, right? Because that whole system keeps working. But the second you start to become unpredictable, you break your patterns, you break your interest, hobby, whatever, you can start to skew it and change it,
Mm.
and which means you may end up breaking certain fortunes or certain prophecies. But if fate is real, then no matter what you do, you are always bound to reach that destination, even if the road goes, I don't know, to fucking Pluto and back.
Mm.
You're still going to
Mm-hmm.
reach the destination.
Yeah. And I think there's something about like I used to have my uncle used to tell me, he would always say, if you want to know the truth about something or the answer to something, it's always the first second within hearing the thing. So if you listen to yourself within a second of hearing the thing or the question or whatever, you usually whatever you think off the top of your head is usually what the truth is, or some sort of representation of what the truth is. So I think that there's something about when you're breaking the pattern, uh, instead of necessarily following that sort of methodical mindset and approach and outlook on reality, when you kind of go a little bit more instinctual, maybe a little bit more chaotic, maybe a little bit more random. Yeah, that's definitely when the world has to kind of reconform and reconfigure around you.
Because I've been in places where I had been before, or similar type places, and something inside me was like screaming, like a pure intuition.
Mm.
And I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that was. But it was like I didn't listen to it at the time, but it was like a strange thing because I was breaking that pattern complete. No, yeah, no, I was adhering to a pattern, but I got a feeling like I was completely breaking the pattern,
Mm.
and like it led to me like physically shaking, and it was
Mm.
bizarre. But
Yeah,
that's a
well, I
side
mean,
story.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's a
true.
complete removal of your comfort and your sort of, your reality matrix. So, I mean, yeah, I think that there's a level of intuition that we all have that lets us know, like when we're diverging from the matrix, if you will.
Mm. Yeah. Well, and I think too, it's interesting because when you look at like stress in the brain, one of the things that stresses the brain out or uses a lot of brain energy is when you have an unpredictable situation with no clear end date and you're constantly having to pivot and adjust, which it's just
Mhm.
like, because like usually we have a pattern, either it's a work schedule or a run schedule, or stay up all night and play video games and sleep schedule, like there's still some sort of routine that we settle into. And then when you start to break that, the brain gets it experiences like allostatic overload, which is one of the like wear and tear on the brain. So it's just interesting, yeah, because it can happen too, and you're not even like aware of it, like you were saying, Mike. You can just feel it in your body.
I think there's something about psychological inertia that we that's probably been talked about by many psychologists, but I kind of see it as the law of inertia, but within the psyche, and we get into patterns quite easily because they're comfortable and they make sense and they help us make sense of our world. The problem is that sometimes those patterns aren't the best for us and they're not actually good for us at all. And so breaking out of those patterns tends to, like Ayla said, affect you psychologically. It can induce anxiety, it can induce depression, it can induce major fear. But I think that there's something powerful in that act of breaking the programming that allows you to create, which is interesting because I think that being able to divert that energy to a different source or to a different destination is something that you're kind of like taking a mallet to the stained glass window that is your reality, and you're just like, all right, well, time to rebuild a new one.
Yeah.
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 Well, I listened to a really cool lecture, and just so you're talking about like neural pathways, and they get strengthened by repetition and practice of thinking, feeling, and acting.
Mm.
And I remember listening to this lecture about like some of the geniuses of our time and like some of the things that they had in common, and even like some high performing individuals now who don't say they're geniuses per se. They just have a schedule that works for them. And one of the biggest things was just that they recognize when they're putting more brain input into something than when they're not. And if there's a brain intensive activity, they'll take a break, which is interesting because you could do like a TV break or a nap break or something like that. But if you're working on like a complex problem, the best thing you can do is stop completely and then go work on a different problem, like a hobby or I don't know, rock climbing, where you're still
Wait,
solving a puzzle, but your
wait.
brain's what?
Are you saying that fucking off is the proper thing to do sometimes?
Sometimes. No, 100%. There's been studies that talk about like a lot of like Silicon Valley people, they're into rock climbing because you're using your brain in a different way. So your subconscious is still working out the other problem, but you're so in the present in a different problem that is enjoyable for you that it allows the parts of your brain that were fatigued to refresh in a way that's more beneficial to you than napping or something like that. Yeah.
That makes
So get
sense.
some hobbies is the big nugget there.
I
And
got
it's
And
some
just
hobbies.
active meditation. That's what that is.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Even like a bike ride, physical stimulation. These are all really good things for the brain, and it breaks up the predictability in a good way. But speaking about like brain stuff and like latest science, I really wanted to end the prophecy discussion with like a look to the future. So we heard what Nostradamus thinks is going to happen, zombies, whatever. I've got my archery skills on point. But there's also the US government, their intelligence community has a wing. It's the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity Department.
IARPA?
IARPA. Yeah.
I miss like good acronyms like SCUBA.
Yeah.
Pluto.
They love their ARPA.
I know. It's always.
There's like 5 or 6 ARPAs.
Yeah. ARPA, a Sharpa. But it's cool. Like, okay, so Nick had sent me this article. It's on Big Think, and it's called Secretive Agency Uses AI Human Forecasters to Predict Future. And I was like, what? And so I was going through it and I was like, let me just make sure this is a real thing. And it is a real thing. And their website's so fascinating. And like, guys, they have calls for like contests and you can apply to be a program manager if you have like a really cool new idea. And so one of the things they do is they use teams of human non-experts and AI machine learning to forecast future events. So that's like one of their little groups.
Wow.
And so looking at like their staff members' research areas, you've got forecasting, logic and critical thinking, human judgment, AI, neuroscience, cognitive science, complex systems, energy storage, renewable liquid fuels, space situational awareness, optical interferometry, image reconstruction. There's a lot of stuff about like data collection and storage, as well as like merging that data and using it in like an efficient way. Chem and biosensors, like it just was really cool, and machine learning and quantum information science and stuff like that. Um, so one of the missions that I wanted to highlight, well, there's two. Yeah, there's two. So here it says, we're on a mission to improve the accuracy and timeliness of geopolitical forecasts by advancing the science of forecasting. Can you create a method to forecast the future? The Geopolitical Forecasting Challenge invites solvers from around the world to develop innovative solutions and methods for integrating crowdsourced forecasts and other data into accurate, timely forecasts on worldwide issues, with prizes up to 250,000 in prizes to be awarded.
Wow.
Right? Like that's like they're straight up like we're going to use science to become like the next Nostradamus, but in like the lens of geopolitical forecasting, which I just was like, whoa.
Well, not just that lens. I'm sure it
Yeah.
expands much farther than
Yeah.
geopolitics.
It's a little scary.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Especially since their other things that they work on are facial recognition, fingerprint collection, complex systems, situational awareness. You know, it's building. This is Skynet.
Skynet. Well, and there's precedence
Skynet-like.
too, though, because it's
Yeah.
also like, it's a fine line. Like, do you want your safety? Do you want your illusion of safety? Do you want a little less safety? And it's like that popular line of how much safety we want and how much we want to compromise to achieve it, quote or no quote, is always something that's been talked about. But I do think it's interesting. Like in the 60s, they used to have undercover I think police officers go to like student group meetings to make sure that they could like be in the end of any like crazy talk and get ahead of it. So
I just don't like governments owning AIs. I feel quite passionate about AI sovereignty and the notion that they're it's quite doable, but it's not something that it's a thing. I'll just say that.
It's a thing. No,
I'm drinking Corona beer and I'm very drunk and have no idea what I'm talking about.
Well,
I
and it
know.
makes me.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it makes me wonder too. It's like, so I mean, what happens when this system starts being able to predict geopolitics? Does that create kind of a paradox of sorts? Because like to me, it would seem that like if you had this system that announced that X country is going to do this to Y country, then do you put them up for, like, do you put them in the Geneva Convention, or are you putting them up for war crimes that haven't existed yet?
And
Does the announcement of the potential that this might happen change the possibility that it happens? I mean, there's a lot of questions.
Usually you arrest the criminals after they commit the crime, not beforehand. That's
Well,
the thing
man,
I don't like.
yeah.
Precognition thing.
Guys, you're skipping ahead. This is group question number 1.
Well, hold on.
Well, then ask us some question.
Humans, hold on. Humans have free will, which implies that they can break this forecasting. That's all I want to say. So if you forecast a geopolitical event, yes, it may happen. But the humans that are actually in the helm of power, that they can change that from happening. But again, like going on the intuition and then the pattern recognition, it's what you're doing. You're just kind of pointing it in that direction, and more than likely it may land in there, but hopefully it doesn't.
Well, I feel like 100% we're going to see that like particle observed experiment replicated among humans. So it's like, geopolitical events do happen according to a specific pattern unless observed. And then everybody's like, nope, not doing it. And we don't
Yeah,
know
I
why.
mean,
We're just suddenly not doing it. We feel like we're
human
being
nature.
observed.
Human
Yeah.
nature, we don't like the idea of things that for as much as we want to talk about predicting the future, we don't like our futures being set in stone. We don't
Right.
we
It's
don't want that to happen, you know.
Yeah. And I think going back to what you were talking about was kind of yeah, so my group question had brought up Minority Report and that dilemma because I love the movie in that it centers on a world that basically uses prophets and AI to see crimes before they happen. And then they prosecute based on intent. So, like you were saying, Mike, yeah, usually we wait for a person to do something bad. But wouldn't it be interesting to see how forecasting develops in the sense where if you can predict person X and person Y are going to do this bad thing, like, what do you
Yeah.
do with that if they haven't done anything yet?
Well, you can. My thing is that you remove agency from the human. You've devolved us to animals. Like if
Good point.
I can basically, if I take a rabbit and I cut the rabbit from head to tail and I leave it in the middle of a wolf's den, I can pretty much 100% assume that the wolves are going to eat that rabbit. And that's what you're turning humans into.
99.999. No, I'm
Yeah,
kidding.
sure. Yeah, you know, you're right.
They might be like, I don't know, humans touch that. It smells weird.
Yeah. Mike touched it. I'm not gonna go grab that rabbit.
I saw his tarot cards. They're not good, man.
But the idea that like you can predict what a human will do based off of stuff is it's demeaning to the human on a conscious level, on a spiritual level, on an intellectual level, because you've turned us back into animals. Good job.
Yeah, it's moralistically kind of repugnant, to be honest. And it really makes me think that this is like a chicken or egg situation that we're going to be dealing with, because I honestly can't understand how, like, so if we had this sort of idea of being able to predict pre-crime or whatever.
Precognition.
Well, no, I mean, like, you know, but we're talking about
Oh, yeah,
in
precognition
specifically.
and prosecution. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. To me, it's like
Dissertation.
to me,
Sorry.
if you're prosecuting somebody before they even actually commit the act, then is it not? How is it provable that the person will actually do what the algorithm said?
Well, 100%. And this movie is so interesting because a lot of it is also based around this guy who's going to do some bad thing and he learns about it and he's like, no way. There's no way. And then I don't know if it was because of the knowing.
Yeah, usually that's what the paradox is, right? So it's you don't know that you have a deterministic sort of end until you were told that, and then everything you do reinforces the end, you know?
Right.
Like
Right.
Schrodinger's
Right.
time traveler or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and I do think that we are going to see because like okay, so we try to stay away from like reality on this podcast, but I do think it's worth mentioning that like there is a lot of data accumulation that's happening very swiftly with patents being filed based on that data. And then when you start to see stuff like this, it does become a question of like, well, who should own this? We've had like private companies like Facebook, for example, they have access to so much data and then they became public. And then they also maybe from inception or closer started to feed into, like crime investigations. And there's been like really interesting lawsuits about that in very specific cases or like Alexa. I think there was, like a murder that was recorded on an Alexa and they were trying to like open it for the purposes of the case to find out what happened, victims' rights and all. But then it was also like, oh God, this is dangerous precedence because if we open it for this one case, that means anything in earshot of an Alexa is like no longer private. and these
Yeah.
are in our homes. And
Wait a
so
minute.
like
They haven't been private for a long time.
Oh,
So
I
Explain
yeah,
that.
they
know.
were
Hey,
never
This is
wait
all
till you get that
supposed
optics.
mirror, right? It just shows
Yeah.
your whole house and
All
get
we're
your
doing is
biometric
talking
data. Yeah.
optics.
Right. Yeah. I think that there's like going to be really, we're going to have a whole mess of technological quandaries to work out in a very short amount of time, which doesn't usually end up being the best situation. But let's go to challenge number 2. So the second example, which I thought was really online with this show, says, can you create a method to forecast the future? The Mercury Challenge presents an opportunity for individuals and teams to earn prizes by creating innovative solutions using machine learning and AI methods to automatically predict the occurrence of critical events.
Mm.
Critical events. I don't know. I was like, as scary as it is, I'm also just like, wow. Like if humans get to a point where we realize that we're super predictable and like in the best possible scenario, like how could that benefit?
Westworld season 3.
Huh? Oh,
Westworld
Westworld season
season
3.
3. That's exactly what happened. Is that they created this AI system that realized that humans are extremely predictable, and they create this society in which if you're one of those humans that the AI realizes isn't going to live for very long, you don't get a good job, you don't get any of the good parts of life, and the world goes to the people who have longevity and aren't going to do something stupid. you know um
How boring.
it
Yeah,
is
how
quite
droll.
boring, and I think there's something kind of sick in humans, and it's within all of us that wants to remove every obstacle possible. And I think we're seeing this as sort of like total control is really the insecurity of the human experience, trying to grasp at straws and find ways to control our reality. When I think
Mm.
that what we're doing really is creating even more chaotic world by throwing this sort of all-encompassing control into the mix.
Well, and I think too, there's an element of, even in this case, self-fulfilling prophecy, because let's say you do get a team of people and they have a set of algorithms and they also say zombies are coming in 2021. Okay, so we know they're coming. We can prepare. So we start all preparing for this zombie apocalypse. And then no zombies. What happens then? Do we then like redefine zombie, or do we just realize we wasted a lot of time on something that was like statistically relevant
No, because
by
what
an
we'll
AI?
do as sense making machines, we will look back and say, well, it must have been all of our preparation that kept the zombies away. We're very
Well,
good about justifying anything that actually ever happens in a way that makes sense for us. So that's the kind of the whole point, is like we can only really know that something is destined to be what it is after it is done. Like, and that's just the nature of time and the past and the present. Like we and then the future. Like the future is always unknown, and I think that we can probably math our way into a better understanding of patterns, but there is a drawback of relying on those patterns too much, because humans are also unpredictable, and we throw who said that? Dostoevsky, I think, right? Said that if utopia actually existed, it would last for maybe a day until people started destroying it,
Hmm.
because we don't want to have everything wrapped up in a bow. We want life to be
Right.
a little bit messy.
Well, it's like
And
that adage too, where it's like you can be spending your whole life trying to get a steady job and get a mortgage and have like a really, have some roots. But then you can also be in that situation and be like, oh, I'm bored. This is the same
mm,
job every day. This is this house forever. And like, so we can always find a way to complain about like one scenario or the other. And we can also deny ourselves the happiness of the present seeking to attain that thing that we think is going to make us happy. Um, so yeah, so I don't know. There's a lot of interesting stuff here, and I think that like Mike's comment about hindsight is probably where I want to kind of end it. More along the lines too of Final Destination, because in that one he sees his death, and then he takes action to get off a plane and not die, but fate is still coming for him, and there's no like he's powerless to change it. So in this scenario, if everything is determined, it's going to happen eventually. I mean, like, like death, we're all going to die eventually. Is there any value in knowing that future of when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen if you can't do anything about it?
I honestly, I maybe there is, but I'm of the I'd rather never know ilk. Like I just don't think for me personally there would be any utility in knowing some sort of future event that's really going to impact me. Like I would just spend the rest of my days focused on that and not, like you said just a moment ago, not actually living life.
Yeah.
Like that becomes like its own little paradox because perhaps had I not dwelled so much on this possible future, I could have actually actively changed it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's entertainment value in knowing it, and then I also think too, like suppose I have some gruesome death where I get tortured before I die, and then badly tortured, like 72 hours of tortures, something like that.
Damn.
And that goes on, and I see the future, and there's nothing I can do to change it, quote unquote, until up until the point where I realize I'm about to get captured. Then you can or up until that point, you actually start to get tortured or get captured or get pushed to that. You always have a way out through suicide. So, if you if you like the Stoics' point of view of suicide, that it's an honorable death, and if you feel so much pain, you should do it no matter what, then that could be a way to change your fortune without changing the overall thing. But now you've avoided this deterministic future that's happened while keeping within this constraints of death.
Yeah, that sounds like you can't fire me, I quit.
Yeah, it's basically the ultimate one.
Yeah.
But then it's like, I don't know if you remember Castaway when he does try to kill himself, but he's like, I don't know, I've been injured 6 ways from Sunday. I'm going to test this theory. And then he realizes that he would just crash against the rocks and be
Mangled
in and die slowly. Yeah, so it's like even in like a suicide attempt, you can't predict what's going to happen either. So it's always still like this thread of fate that has us captured. And I like, Nick, how you were saying that you wouldn't want to know. If you can't change it, why know? And it's just funny because yeah, like having that information, unless you could change it and create the perfect world for yourself,
Yeah.
which might not even be the thing that you need. You're right. Like sometimes we have this vision of what is going to be making us happy, but it's totally like we need to evolve and then we find peace and happiness in a different way. But regardless of all that, we still try to know. We still seek to know. We have our little algorithms or we have our little patterns or our little brain is trying to predict what's going to happen next to keep us safe. So I just thought that was really interesting. And to your point too, there's a cancer doctor who did research about caring for patients. And one of the things he wrote about was how we need to stop doing this like you have 5 years to live thing, 3 years to live, that like that kind of information is not helpful to somebody.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just like really cool to see him writing about that. And I'm still kind of like on the fence because I'm like, yeah, but like if I had a year, I definitely would want to go travel or you know what I mean? Like I think in my mind, but then I'm also like, I don't know, maybe he is right. And so just kind of
and I think that, not to get too into the anti-science narrative, but I think that there's also a power in an authority figure telling you that you're ill. I really do. I think that there's something that we do with authority subconsciously
or
where
you're like, my where you're like, oh, he said 3 years, it's 2 years, 360 days. Fuck you, fate.
I'm just
Like,
gonna jump off a cliff and done, and then my ass survives because I'm bad at committing suicide or
yeah,
something.
for 5 days, I'm just suffering. Like
Right.
we said, shit. Yeah, I don't know. I really do, like, if I could, like, know the mysteries of the universe, I really would love to know if there is, I mean, yeah, I don't know, free will and fate. It's good to think about.
mean,
I think it's
there's
a mixture. Yeah.
Now
Yeah,
I need
I-
another beer.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely both. I think there's a mixture. I think that what we do is we are free will creatures in a deterministic universe. And, we do our best to fight against the currents. And sometimes we win and other times we don't.
What if
It's like
there's
salmon swimming upstream.
and
what if
that's
there,
the beauty.
what what if there's like a set of fates? Like you have free
Mm.
will, and you have like one of
A
7
handful
fates.
of outcomes. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I could
and-
see that.
and the summation of your actions put you in one of those bins.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree, and I think that that's possible. But then
Mhm.
you'd have to
Like a video game RPG world.
you'd have to expand out farther than that, and then say, well, if there's a handful, then why couldn't there just be infinite?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
No, there's definitely it could be infinite, but I don't think
Could
it's as big as the cosmic infinity, because there's
Yeah.
bounds to things like technology, language. All of those things would make your set of infinity smaller, maybe even to a point where it'd be easily discretable, right?
Mm.
So I can see where it can be infinite, but I can also see like I think my birth was one of these strange anomalies, because according to my mom, the doctor told her I wasn't supposed to be born, pretty much. Like she was never going to have a kid.
Ah.
And as I run it through my mind, the events of like my dad meeting like all the events goes down seems to be like it comes down to a very small set of probabilities, and fate, I think, plays out in a similar fashion. Should there be a thing of fate?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, this has been such a really great conversation. And I want to just reread the poem that I started out with, because I chose it. Well, I'll just read it and just think back on what we've talked about for the last 90 minutes. He says, when I run after what I think I want, my days are a furnace of stress and anxiety. If I sit in my own place of patience, what I need flows to me and without pain. From this, I understand that what I want also wants me, is looking for me and attracting me. There is a great secret here for anyone who can grasp it. And I just feel like that.
Like grains of sand in your hand, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, the grasping ends up being the issue. And it's like, as much as we seek to control things during tough times and turn to like predictive functions, tarot and astrology and all that stuff, it's also, I think, important to let go of some of that control too. And so with that, that's all I got.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ayla, for that stellar conversation. We really
That's
enjoyed
dope.
it. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, thanks for your ideas too. I probably could. This could have been like a 3-hour talk, I think, too.
Oh yeah,
I got more stuff.
There's a lot to talk about, and that we'll probably revisit in another episode. In the meantime, thank you very much, you guys, for listening. We really appreciate you. We always appreciate having your feedback and your support. We thank you very much. So if you feel inclined, please leave us comments. Let us know what you think. What do you think? Do we live in a deterministic universe? Do we have free will? What are your thoughts about all of that? And please stay tuned. We're going to have a very special episode on Thursday evening, which is New Year's Eve. I'm going to get together with some friends and have a discussion about the concept of time as a more of an umbrella theme for the episode. Everybody is going to bring their own little topic underneath the umbrella of the theme time, and we're going to have a cool conversation about different stuff. So if you do not have anything to do on New Year's Eve and you feel like hanging out with us, please stay tuned for that. And thank you to all of you guys for listening. We really appreciate it. And until next time, Cognonauts, you stay out there, and we will catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.